Well, hi everybody. It's Doug here, Doug Mystic Eye, I'm Board Game Geek. Samurai Sheepdog is our company, and I'm here to talk to you about a game that was recently kickstarted that I did not kickstart, and I will talk about why, called Heroes Wanted, a superhero board game, which I do not believe there are enough of. There should be many more. I'm a huge fan of Sentinels of the Multiverse. I have every single thing that's available for that game. And I play it fairly often solo, and I'll play it with groups, and if anybody sits down and wants to play it, I'd be happy to. Outside of that, there aren't that many other superhero board games that really strike my fancy, and I can't think of many at all in that regards. But this is one of them, and when I saw it pop up for Kickstarter, and I do follow a lot of Kickstarter stuff and have invested way too heavily in it, but I was excited because I saw a superhero game, and then I went and popped over and looked at it, and I don't know, for some reason it just didn't strike me when I saw the board set up and all the generic meeples on the board and etc. etc. Just, I don't know, I like the idea of having the mix and match hero cards. I thought that was cool, and I'll show you what that looks like later if you haven't already seen it. And I like the way that the game board was specific to a scenario and looked like a newspaper with a lot of the specific rules right there on the board. It's very cool. But the gameplay, I saw the gameplay, and for some reason it just didn't strike me. And so I passed on the Kickstarter, which is unusual for me. I passed on it, I didn't even look at it. I was like, done, moved on. Didn't even attempt to back it. But then I got to see I was at my gaming group, and someone had their first Kickstarter version of it, and they were playing it, and I got to sit and watch it for a bit. And I was like, well, actually, that looks like a pretty fun game. So I picked it up myself. And that's where we're at today. I've picked it up, I've played it a couple of times, I've got to watch it played, and after seeing that, I actually think the game's really cool, and I can't wait to see the expansions, mainly in the form of new scenarios that can come out for this game. It's going to be tremendous. So, I've already given you my opinion of it, but let's talk about how to play the game. So I want to talk about setup first, because that's always where we start, right? And the setup in this is not small. It's kind of heavy, but it goes quickly. And let's talk about setting up the first scenario of the game. So each game of Heroes Wanted starts with a scenario, and there's a portion of the book, and this happens to be on page 16 for the scenario littering, loitering, and jaywalking, which is the kind of, I would call it the basic scenario of the game, the one you start with. And this clearly outlines what you need to do in your setup. So it also shows you what you would do, what you would score if you're playing the solo play game. So when you're first starting the game, you're going to look at the setup portion of the rules and go to the scenario that you are interested in and begin to set that up, which will then look much like this. So this is the setup of the littering, loitering, and jaywalking scenario. The board itself is actually the scenario, and each side you get two boards, and each side has a different scenario on it. And within that, you're going to build some things from this. So starting from the top, it does give you little story elements here. Looks like a newspaper. It's very cool. This is where you create your villain, and this is where you then create your headlines. And in this particular scenario, these are randomly laid out, and the headlines have certain things which we'll talk about later. And then you also line up the hit points for the villain that you get, and the hit points are based again on the scenario. In this case, it's so many hit points. I think it's 15 per player, so it'd be 45 points. It tells you this track here is the threat track, and it will go down if the villain escapes, and that's bad. And the only one thing I don't like is this teeny little threat token that goes on here. I'm going to find something else for that. But that being said, you're going to go down this track. And when it's colored, you're going to take a special action on here, and if it's not, then you're going to do something else. And there's several steps here to the villain phase. So what I do like is this is clearly laid out. All the rules are there for you for this scenario, pretty much on the board, except for the initial setup's actually there, which is kind of neat. And then of course you set up all the henchmen, these guys, and underlings, these guys, and the villain. And it starts on the 0 spot here. Now you notice that I missed a henchman. I do have to put one right here, but you do notice that the spaces are marked for us so that we can see where we need to put each of the characters that need to be put in place. And lo and behold, the villain has summoned his final henchman to the table. So in the scenario, littering, loitering, and jaywalking, we're going to be fighting all of these Greek people that are on board. None of them are civilians, though I guess they can, I don't know, none of these guys are civilians, but the villain is going to make his way, his or her way in this case, across the street and around the town until they end up leaving the board. Meanwhile, we're going to have to be fighting our way through all of the henchmen and underlings that make up the villain's group. And with that, these red spots are blocked off because we can't jaywalk. We're good guys. And in the game, you're basically I want to say, a wannabe hero that's trying to make it into the big leagues. And so you have these really funny combinations of heroes, and you have these funny scenarios like trying to stop a nasty villain from jaywalking and littering. So yeah, it's kind of funny. And then of course the loitering part is all the henchmen and that standing around doing nothing, and you have to stop them by pummeling them into the ground and being a superhero. Pretty cool. But like I said, I do like now that I've gotten to play it and understand the setup, it makes perfect sense. So these are headlines, by the way. These headlines are randomly drawn. I think I already said that, but they allow you to do, like this one says, you get your first headline for the first person that dealt 10 points to the villain. They're going to get this first spot here for 3 points, and that comes off of a card that actually gives you more abilities later on. It's kind of a neat mechanic. I like it. But that's the setup of the main board. And so with that, now the other thing we did is we picked from a massive group of villain A cards, which show the top portion of the villain, the taco, the tsunami, and the terror, for instance, as examples. And then you have the B sides of the villain, which is the bottom half. So the Baron Von or 1,000-year-old, which is interesting, and each of these has, the bottom ones usually have some sort of passive type ability, while the top ones usually have a power of some sort. And I'll show you that in more detail on our villains and our heroes. Well, we're going to take one of each of those, and you can see here on the board that we have drawn the Octo Twins, which I thought was actually amusing that we drew the multi-hand arm thing with the multi-headed thing going on. Anyway, so we have the Octo Twins, and they have a special power that actually relies on some dice rolls, which makes it more entertaining. And both of these have some special things on them. What is interesting about the combination is you're rolling dice here and you're rolling dice here, and it could give you some interesting effects. But that was the villain that we drew at random, and then we placed out the hit points underneath that we'll be taking off and putting in our achievement track for our heroes. Speaking of heroes, the next thing that we do is we set up our hero card. In this case, we draw 3A cards that have the top portion of the hero on them, as you can see here. So in this case, we have the computer, the cobra, and the volcano. And you draw 3 B cards, and those are the bottoms of the characters. So like you see the giant, naked, and neon. So if we were to combine the two together, you might have the giant computer. Okay, and each of those has a special ability and a innate power for the bottom. And so what you've seen here is that we have one of our heroes. We used the red board, and we drew the invisible Viking. Now after that, we look to see what type of hero it is. So in this case, we see that the invisible Viking is a vigilante hero who has a special action card called Press and an epic action called Retaliate. We also then draw another card that's representative of their ability from a small deck that has the additional abilities that you can get during the game. The other thing you'll do as part of setup is take a series of basic cards. These cards usually start with a costume, a charge, the strike, and a superpower card, which is given to you separately, as well as the maneuver card. The reason the superpower card is different, and I'll show you that, is because it is an epic card. And the reason that I believe that it's epic is because when you play other cards, someone will say pick up a basic card, and it won't be one of these. And we'll talk about the card anatomy, etc. in a little bit. So these cards represent actions you can take, and these numbers up here also represent your ability to defend yourself in the form of stamina. So you're going to play one of these cards each turn, but we're going to get into turn order in a little bit. The other thing you're going to pick up is, as I said, a special card. In this case, it's called Press. This is the special card for the vigilante hero. You also get an epic card, which for now will be tucked under your board there, That is an epic special ability called Retaliate. And how you get that is by uncovering these two slots here on your power board right there, that you will uncover by placing these on headlines that you achieve during the game. Of course, you also get your pawns. Now, in the case of the Viking, you also need to take a token, which you will spend during the game. Now, not everybody will have those tokens. It depends. Every color board has those tokens. However, you may not be spending them because your hero may not be using them. In this case, we are. So at the top portion of the Viking, you can see that he has a superpower called the Blow from Valhalla, and it's an attack power. It says you can move and deal deal 6 damage to a character at range 0. Discard your power token to deal 5 to another character within range 1. And you roll a die. On a 4 to 6, you attract your token back to your hero. So that's the upper portion of the Viking. Of course, he's not just the Viking, he's the invisible Viking. And this has a passive ability. It says reduce damage dealt to you by heroes and villains by 3. So he's harder to see, therefore he takes less damage from attacks. Also on your player board in his achievement space, that you will place things like the henchmen and underlings that you kill, and the hit points that you take from the villain. And those achievements will build up into victory points at the end of the game. But you can also take injuries, and injuries actually reduce. Now, victory points in this game are called fame, and the injuries you take will actually reduce those victory points or fame points from your total score at the end of the game, should you not be able to get rid of them. So once you have your hero set up, and every player of course will have their hero set up, you're going to get to the next part of the game, which would be setting up our board, which we've already done. And then you're going to start by determining who the first player is, typically done by a roll of the dice. For this example, we have created 3 heroes, and this one is the Heavy Metal Cop. And again, I use the rules where you draw 3 A cards, 3 B cards, and you pick the ones you want. So we have the Heavy Metal Cop, and we'll go over powers later. You can see that they're all set up and ready to go. Her pawn is right here for now, and you also see a space there called Quirks. Now, in a multiplayer game, you're going to have a quirk, which is something you will lose victory points for if you don't do. And these quirks are actually hilarious. Now, some people might find these things annoying, but I actually think they're great. And you can see that there's a 10 spot there, and your marker will start on the 10 spot. In this case, your quirk would be that you're obsessed with teamwork. It says after another hero deals damage to a villain, you must congratulate them. If you fail to congratulate them and another player points it out to you, your marker is going to go from 10 to 8, which means you're going to score less points at the end of the game for not adhering to your quirk. And that makes quirks a great addition to the game. It adds some levity to the strategic and tactical mechanics of the game, and kind of lightens it up. It makes it a lot of fun. The third hero that we created using the green board is the Furious Tornado. And so now that we've got all 3 of our heroes set up, the next thing we would do is of course get our cards, which I've already shown you. And in this case, this epic one will end up going under his board, and he also has a special deflect, which is his special card for being a different type of hero known as a cosmic hero. Then of course he has his basic cards and his superpower, which is his suit. So once they're set up and ready to go, we're going to then place in player order, place our characters onto the game board. For this quick demonstration, I will not be using the quirks because that would just seem weird talking to myself like that. But let's assume that for the sake of the gameplay that our invisible Viking is the first and starting hero. So he would take his token and place it onto a legal space on the board. Now, knowing what he knows about his adversary allies, which are both adversaries, this is a competitive game, not a cooperative game, he decides he's going to place his character right there where he can immediately go after and try and do some damage quickly to the villain. That would mean that the Furious Tornado gets to place next. So the Tornado is thinking, well, you go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to start up here where I can wipe the board with impunity and not have a villain nearby or potentially other heroes, even though there's still one left to be placed. Last but not least, we have to place our pawn for the Heavy Metal Cop, which is the 3rd player in this first round. Now she wants to get to the villain too, but she doesn't want to be that close to either of the players, or as far away as she can, so she decides she's going to start on this side of the street and work her way up thinking that the villain will cross over here and end up on this side pretty quickly. So the last thing we have in this setup is basically our fame track, which is what tracks our victory points, called fame. And we put 3 of our tokens in the 0 spot because you can actually go negative in the game. And that pretty much marks our ability to begin the scenario. In this case, littering, loitering, and jaywalking. So with the Invisible Viking as our first player, what we're going to do is we're going to select from one of his cards what we want to play as our action for our first turn. So in the case of our Invisible Viking, let's say that he decides he's going to first play his card Charge. And this will be the card that he plays for the turn. Now you can see that it allows him, in this card, he moves 1 and deals 4 damage to a character within range 1. As long as you are the first hero, which he is, Charge has a +1 move, so he can move up to 2. Now, one of the things you don't want to do is get too surrounded, because you're going to take damage from all those bad guys that are next to you. So let's say, for example, he does want to get close to the villain, but doesn't want to take too much damage. He can go 1 here, and actually to 2 to here. But let's say he just decides he's going to move 1 here. That'll put 3 guys around him, and he's going to clobber this henchman here at range 0 for 4 points, which is enough to stop a underling. As you can see, underlings have exactly 4 hit points. So basically, you just saw the Invisible Viking's full turn. You can see that the underling that he attacked and defeated is right there. There is his spent card sitting next to the rest of his action deck of cards that he has left to play during the round. But that is the only thing he gets to do for this turn. After that, the turn would pass to the Furious Tornado. So let's say that the Furious Tornado decides to play the same card, the Charge card. This is going to be interesting, and I'll show you why, and it shows you what the interaction in the game is like. This is his attack card as 2. Now again, it does allow him to move 1, so let's say he moves to here and does the same basic thing. He attacks this underling there and for 4 points, as noted on the card, and stops him. However, the Furious Tornado is, after all, furious, so he has this passive ability. It says, after you play an attack action, which this was, the Charge was, you, during the hero phase, deal 1 damage to a hero with the same active action as you. Well, that would be the Invisible Viking, who has a... Now, he could do that to the Heavy Metal Cop as well, but the Invisible Viking actually used a charge action. So let's say he applies that to the Invisible Viking. Well, in this case, the Invisible Viking is quite lucky because he is invisible. So he reduces damage dealt by heroes and villains by 3, so that 1 really doesn't do anything. But let's say he didn't have the ability to do that. What he would have to do then is defend himself or take an injury, and we certainly don't want that. He would be KO'd, and that's a bad thing. All his cards get... it's not good. He would have to play a card from his hand with a number equal to or greater than the damage in stamina to defend against it. So he would probably have to play his press special card as a 2 instead, so that he can defend against the attack that just came from the Furious Tornado from all the way across the battlefield. So the last player to go in this turn, this first round, would be our Heavy Metal Cop. So she is right here, located on this side of the street next to these henchmen. And what she decides to do is play a different card than the others. She's going to play the Strike card. As you can see, it is one of her basic cards, as it is for everyone. But it allows her to become the first hero, which is good because she wants to go first next round, and she's last this round. That's going to almost give her 2 turns in a row, kind of, sort of. It also allows her to deal 5 damage to a character within range 1. But there's more. Had she been able to get to range 0, she would have dealt an additional 4 damage to a character. Now that could be a villain or a hero, but she doesn't need to do that. And it won't affect her with using the Strike, because with the Strike she can't move into range 0 with any of the henchmen or underlings. So she essentially does the same thing and knocks out one of the underlings, placing it her achievement board and spending her attack basic action of, it's called Strike. Now that all the heroes have taken their first action, it's time for Octo Twins, the villain, to take her action. And how do we determine what she's going to do? At the beginning of the villain phase, we're going to roll 2 dice. And if we had rolled an 8, we would have followed the Octo ability, which would make each hero discard one of their actions. This did not happen. Just beneath her character on the player board, it describes the villain phase in this scenario. So you can see the first thing that we're going to do is the villain is going to move to the next sequentially numbered space, which will take the villain from this 0 space to the 1 space, unfortunately right next to our invisible Viking. The next thing we do is step 2. We advance the threat track and we resolve its effects. So for this first round, we're going to advance the threat track, which you see it lands on a yellow space, and that has some significance, showing us that the villain litters, and we place an event token on the space with the villain. Now the litter tokens are going to be right here, and we'll show you where we place that. So you can see that we're going to take the villain off, and we're going to place the litter token right there, and we're going to put the villain back on there. The villain has committed the first crime of the scenario in throwing some trash down on the ground. The last step is that the villains and the minions attack. The first thing that we look at are the henchmen and underlings that are within range 1 of our villain. Each underling that's within range 1 is going to do 1 point, and each henchman is going to do 2. So we can see here that already our hero, the invisible Viking, has 1 point for this underling, 2, 3 for this henchman, 4, 5 for the other henchman. But that's not all. So for our invisible Viking, in addition to the 5 points of damage that he's going to take from the enemies immediately around him, we're also going to roll 2 dice for the twins. And as you can see, we rolled a 4 and a 3. If we had rolled duplicates, we would have dealt 10 damage to each hero on the board. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to deal 2 damage because we did not roll doubles. So each hero takes 2 damage. That leaves our invisible Viking to contend with 7 damage in total. Now, let's go back to his board and see what he can do about that. To avoid being KO'd, you have to block all of the damage done in a round to you by the villains. Now, we do know that the invisible ability allows him to reduce that damage by 3. So instead of having the 7 points of damage, we only have to deal with 4. So our invisible Viking has a card that is equal to exactly 4, which is the maneuver card. Now that does allow him to move and become the first hero, but it's better than giving up some of the other higher power abilities that he might have. Now, in addition to this, we could also play, which is more likely, to play our costume, which will block 7 points. However, we might want to do that in the next turn because it also allows us to retrieve another basic or special action. The only one we've used so far is our charge. So in this case, he's going to burn his maneuver card to block the remaining damage, which equals 4 stamina removed from his abilities and his actions for this turn. And so that is going to be how he takes damage. Now we need to go and look at how the Furious Tornado takes damage. So for him, you can see that he too has 3 of the enemies around him. He's got 2 underlings for 2 points and 1 henchman for 2 points for 4 total points, plus the 2 that the villain has done to all of the heroes on the board for a total of 6 points. Now again, he has to look at his cards and decide what is he willing to give up. Is he willing to give up his strike, which would block all the damage, or is he willing to give up his costume, which would also allow him in the form of blocking, which is what he's doing, to move 1 and pick up the charge card that he has placed there on the board. But I think for now, he's just going to, because you can always rest and recover all your cards, which does make you basically lose actions, but he'll use his strike card to absorb the remaining 6 points of damage, and that means he took nothing. But of course, we still have to worry about the heavy metal cop. She's in pretty good shape because she only has 1 underling next to her, so that's only 1 point, plus the 2 points that the villain does, for a total of 3. So she can't play her press card, well, she can in combination with something else because it's only a power of 2, or a stamina of 2. So she can't use that by itself to defend. However, she can use her charge card, which she's thinking is not necessarily the best idea. It might be more advantageous for her because this does allow her to move and attack, to use her her move card, maneuver, and that would be 4 points. It is 1 over, so it's 1 wasted, but that's still better. So she's going to use that. And that would wrap up the villain phase. which is going to wrap up our quick play episode of our Heroes Wanted. I'll probably do one more video and just do maybe perhaps 2 more turns for you and help you get to know the game a little bit better. But I think that gives you a decent idea of how the game plays and how simple it is. It's actually quite simple. Now, what you didn't get to see me do is use some of the actual powers of the heroes, because those are only used when you use the superpower card that you have in your actions. But later on, you'll get more cards and more abilities and things that you can do as you become more famous during the battle with the villain who you were stopping from littering. Also, keep in mind that our Invisible Viking is in a good place to pick up the litter and get to a trash can and toss it away for some extra fame. If you get 1 piece of litter thrown away, you're going to get a headline, which is going to get you 1 closer to getting your epic attack ability, which is noted as a printed headline on the player board. So the first person to throw away a piece of trash would gain 3 fame points immediately, and would be able to remove the first token from the gain retaliation ability that would come up if we get 1 more headline. Then we would remove both, and we'd be able to take that card into our hand of actions. Like I said, that's going to end our episode for now, and we'll take a look a little further, and we'll talk about scoring of fame and things of that nature as we continue. So that gives you a little bit of idea. You can see that it's actually a very tactical game with a lot of funny stuff. Now, if we were playing with Quirks, I would have had to get up and do silly things, or so would the other players, which I think is a lot of fun. And I can't wait to play this with my kids. I haven't played it with them yet, only with adults. And the adults get just as into the Quirks anyway. But again, thank you for watching, and I hope that helped you out. So if you're interested in Heroes Wanted, please take a look at it. I actually was surprised by the gameplay. It's rather enjoyable, and I like the quirky fun of the heroes that you create and the odd villains that can come out as a result of the combinations of cards. There must be thousands of combinations, because the decks for the A and B heroes and the A and B villains are not exactly small, which makes it really entertaining. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this short mini episode, to be followed by at least 1 more.